I'm Liza Lorenzetti. I think I know everybody here, and part of Alberta Men's Network, also doing some teaching and research at the university. And I thought I dragged out some photos from the past because some of Vic is here, and I don't know who else, Adrian. Look at how young we're looking over here. So this is Lemlem. This is some of the beginnings of the Alberta Men's Network. And this is part of our approach, is a flower ceremony led by Adrian about, and he would ask all kinds of questions, but one that really touched me the most is asking participants, what is one male role model that touched you in your life, right? Or what is something that you remember about your dad or a positive male role model in your life? And how did it impact you, and come and take a flower on their behalf? Very beautiful things that we do in Alberta Men's Network. And so this sort of gives the essence of our approach. But today I'm going to talk a little bit about the research behind our work. Prior to doing that, I just wanted to honor that we are on traditional Blackfoot territory, a territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And we're also on Treaty 7 territory. And this is also the home of Métis Nation Region 3. And just also honoring Adrian in particular, because this is Blackfoot land, and Adrian is from Siksika and Blackfoot person here. So we are actually on Adrian's, we're guests on Adrian's land. Not all of it belongs to you, but that's right, Adrian's community. So thank you, Adrian, for that. And so you may not be able to see this picture. I always love to show this. It's a bit with the sunlight coming in. But, our view of gender equity is that equity relationships can happen in a just society. So if you don't have a just society, it's really hard to have gender equity, right? And so gender equity is related to all forms of equity, right? And we see, as we'll see in the research, that the more there's inequity in society, the higher the rates of domestic violence will go. I'm going to show a quick 5-minute clip. Some of you may have seen this before. It's an older clip with Tony Porter, who does a lot of work on healthy masculinities.
But Grammarly can help.
And then we'll listen to Grammarly.
It's grammatically correct.
Is that too loud? Can I turn this on? Off and on.
In New York City, between Harlem and the Bronx. Growing up as a boy, we was taught that men had to be tough, had to be strong, had to be courageous, dominating, no pain, no emotions, with the exception of anger and definitely no fear. That men are in charge, which means women are not. That men lead, and you should just follow and just do what we say. That men are superior, women are inferior. That men are strong, women are weak. That women are of less value, property of men, objects, particularly sexual objects. I've later come to know that to be the collective socialization of men, better known as the man box. See, this man box has in it all the ingredients of how we define what it means to be a man. And I also want to say, without a doubt, there are some wonderful, wonderful, absolutely wonderful things about being a man. But at the same time, there's some stuff that's just straight up twisted. And we really need to begin to challenge, look at it, and really get in the process of deconstructing, redefining what we come to know as manhood. This is my two at home, Kendall and Jade. They're 11 and 12. Kendall's 15 months older than Jade. There's a period of time, with my wife, and then was Tammy and I, we just got real busy and bit bam, boom, Kendall and Jade. All right. Now when they were about 5 and 6, 4 and 5, Jade could come to me. It didn't matter, come to me crying, It didn't matter what she was crying about. She can get on my knees, she can snap my sleeve up, just cry it out, Daddy got you, that's all that's important. Now Kendall, on the other hand, like I said, he's only 15 months older than her. He come to me crying. It's like as soon as I would hear him crying, a clock would go off. You know, I would give the boy probably about 30 seconds, which means by the time he got to me, I was already saying things like, why you crying? Pull your head up, look at me, explain to me what's wrong. Tell me what's wrong. I can't understand you while you're crying. And out of my own frustration of my role and responsibility of building him up as a man to fit into these guidelines and these structures that are defining this man body, I would find myself saying things like, just go in your room. Just go in your room, sit down, get yourself together, and come back and talk to me when you can talk to me like a what? Like a man. And he's 5 years old. You know, as I grow in life, I would say to myself, my God, what's wrong with me? What am I doing? You know, why would I do this? And I think back to my father. There was a time in my life where we had a very troubled experience in our family. My brother Henry, he died tragically when we were teenagers. We lived in New York City, as I said, we lived in the Bronx at the time. And the burial was a place called Long Island. It was about 2 hours outside of the city. And as we were preparing to come back from the burial, you know, the cars stopped at the bathroom, you know, let folks take care of themselves for long rides back to the city. And the limousine empties out. My mother, my sisters, my auntie, they all get out. And my father and I stayed in the limousine. And no sooner than the women got out, he burst out crying. He didn't want to cry in front of me, but he knew he wasn't going to make it back to the city. It was better me than to allow himself to express these feelings and emotion in front of the women. And this is a man who 10 minutes ago had just put his teenage son in the ground. Something I just can't even imagine. The thing that sticks with me the most is that he was apologizing to me for crying in front of me. And at the same time, he was also giving me props, lifting me up for not crying. You know, I come to also look at this as this fear that we have as men, this fear that just has us paralyzed, holding us hostage to this man box. I can remember speaking to a 12-year-old boy, a football player, and I asked him, I said, how would you feel if in front of all the players, the coach told you you were playing like a girl? And I expected him to say something like, I'll be sad, I'll be mad, I'll be angry, or something like that. No, the boy said to me, it would destroy me. And I said to myself, God, if it would destroy him to be called a girl, what are we then teaching him about girls?
Okay. And here we go back to that. Just not really setting the context. Is that okay now, Aria? Yeah. Setting the context for what we're talking about here. How did this resonate with people? Resonated?
Yeah, that sounds pretty true.
Yeah, I think this is, that's why we say it's a global issue, right? All of us come from our different backgrounds, and some of this can really resonate, maybe not exactly with how people are brought up, but you can also see, for those who are girls, switch the socialization, and you'll end up with the same box, right? Different box, different responsibilities. Oh, it's still a box. Okay, still a box. Okay. So some quick stuff around violence against women, and if those of you who may know this information already, I'm going to go over it quickly because I want to make sure that we all have some similar baseline. But you know, so it's not violence against women is not about one culture, one race, one class. It impacts 1 to 3 girls and women worldwide, more than 1 billion. And it's not about culture, it's about power. And that's something we need to understand. So it plays itself out differently, sometimes in different cultural contexts, but it's the same thing. It's violence. We'll keep going quickly. And domestic violence is actually recognized as the most severe and pervasive, so the most frequent form of violence against women, with about 35% of women in a lifetime. And we consider similar numbers actually for the 2S LGBTQIA, and actually some researchers within the community, particularly the trans community, have said it's higher. We're careful with not stigmatizing those populations more, but definitely when we see what we call structural violence, or violence against those communities, right, gender and sexually diverse communities, you can see why. Violence outside heightens violence inside relationships. Not working? Hello? Is it working now? Okay. So why do we want to involve men in making change? We can keep going. So in Canada and around the world, men commit the majority of sexual assaults, physical assaults with a weapon, and homicides. When we talk about coercive control, also highly genderized in heterosexual relationships. Violence is also heightened in communities where there's war, state violence, and what we call social disadvantage, right? I try to not use the word poverty because I believe that class and inequality of wealth is structural, so it's not about people are poor, it's about people are oppressed. And so men and boys are also negatively impacted by male violence. We see primarily boys are abused by men as well. And men abuse and kill one another at high rates of gun violence. Men who experience childhood abuse as boys have oftentimes mental health concerns later in life, alcoholism, social isolation, and harm to self and harm to others. So it's like a generational cycle, right? We call it intergenerational trauma sometimes. And so how is it maintained and transmitted? And I would say through norms, what we find is acceptable, attitudes, experiences, policies, and what I would say is permissions. There's a lot of permissiveness. For boys will be boys. Of course, boys are in the playground punching each other. That's normal. That's okay. It's part of, being a boy, being loud, these types of things. And so we have a different measurement for girls, and for those who are on the gender spectrum who don't fit into either box, there's even greater punishments. And so these are some of the connections to why violence is higher in certain communities and among certain people. The chances, if you were brought up in a family where you either witnessed one of your parents abusing the other, or you yourself were abused, the chances are extremely high that you yourself will end up in a similar situation, right? Okay. Is that we need to leave, or? Somebody open the door. Kids.
The code for the alarm.
Where are the kids? Remove that from the video, as exciting as it is. And so when we look at, there's been a lot of research done around what we call compounding factors, or intersectionality. And so all of these, which I talked about before, all of these forms of oppression and experiences of being differentiated also impact how relationships are at home, right? As they should. When you go through a day experiencing racism, when you can't meet your basic needs, when your sexual identity is being attacked, or you even have to hide the gender of your partner, how's your relationship going to be at home? Tense. Yeah, tense. And so that's the connection. That's why I believe that if we just try to deal with domestic violence or violence on its own, we're going down the wrong path. And I think Alberta Men's Network supports that, as Abbas talked about yesterday. Yeah, and so it's also, it's interesting because, there's always this debate, women or men are this equally abusive. You always have these debates. And so violence doesn't stand on its own. It's connected to a social construct. And so when we look at what's happening on sort of my lens is very much in the heterosexual binary right now, and I'm apologizing for that, but it's important to note what's happening in those relationships. But globally, women spend up to 10 times as much on unpaid care work than men. So actually, it's almost 10% of the GDP globally. And so, and we always say, okay, well, that's happening in certain countries, right? There's a blame other countries. But actually, there was a long-term study of 15 years done in 23 middle and high-income countries, so including Canada. And guess what? the unpaid care gap diminished by 7 minutes a day in 15 years. Not a lot of not a lot of change. Although I think we talk about change more than change actually happened. I'm gonna go to the next. And so what do we do about all this? And so a lot of times in our field, people have uploaded the medical model. We have our doctor here, Vic, but we have used for the medical model, but looking at prevention as primary, secondary, and tertiary, as they would look at any other health issue, right? So health, education, and sort of health models to look at violence and domestic violence. And so the idea that primary prevention is about everybody, secondary prevention is that people who they call at risk to do something, so at risk to abuse, and then tertiary prevention is supposedly for those who have committed violence. So our group has some concerns with that because, let's go to the next one, like who defines who's at risk, right? And oftentimes when you see an at-risk group, well, who do you think of? Oppressed communities mostly, right? You can label them if you want, but we won't today. So oftentimes who's at risk and who's vulnerable? Oftentimes people who are at risk or vulnerable have experienced trauma or injustice of various sorts. That's why oftentimes, so we have some issues with that. And then the idea is, okay, if we're going to prevent violence, where does prevention start? So if we have an anti-colonial lens, we see colonization has devastated communities across the globe. Are we preventing, or is it something different, right? Do we have to use different language for that? And then the idea of what I said before, how do we have healthy relationships when we're oppressed? How does it happen? How does oppression impact healthy relationships? And so we like to use what is also a ecological understanding of violence. And so if we look from socio-ecological, that's Rothenberners and others have started this approach. But the idea is that we have to understand violence and healthy relationships from an individual, relational, community, and societal grounds. Otherwise, we're not really looking at the whole picture. It's not about just two people, right? Or one family. Or even it's not just about the intergenerationality of it. Because if it was just about, okay, somebody was abused and then abused somebody else, why is it happening in a more gendered way? Right? It's happening in a more gendered way because men have more permissions to express their childhood trauma through violence more than females. And that's important to understand, particularly, like I said, in heterosexual contexts. So we like to look at things like what's called intersectionality or how people's experiences of power relates to how they experience healthy relationships. And this is you probably can't see it here, but it's got everything like levels of education and your race and your gender, your ethnicity, and all kinds of aspects to it. So these are important to our work, and that's where we came to the idea that we need to take these things into account in order to really affect change. Change has to include looking at all of that. I'm going to give a short video which our brother Vic first showed us in our group when we first came together, and I think it had a lot of tears after seeing this. It's actually an ad for a commercial, but we won't show the commercial part. Everyone see that?
Daddy is the sweetest daddy in the world. Daddy is the most handsome, the smartest, the most clever, the kindest. He is my Superman. Daddy wants me to do well at school. Daddy is just great, but he lies. He lies. having a job. He lies about having money. He lies that he's not tired. He lies that he's not hungry. He lies that we have everything. He lies about his happiness. He lies because of me.
I've seen this like 25 times. and still- Any thoughts on the video or anything that's been shared? Anybody able to talk?
There's a lot of pressure. You can share the pressure you're experiencing because we often have similar pressure as well. It's really trying hard to keep that together.
I think he does a really good job not having all what he needs to do a better job being a father, and even like that, he's a great father. Like in lots of cases, when you're not secure, when you're not feeling well with your work, when you have a lot of pressure or stress and stuff, you don't do a good job as a father because you're all like getting worried about all the things and putting your children maybe in second place. So I think he does a great job at doing both.
Or just continue with what you said, or sometimes when dads or parents are not in a good situation in any area pretty much, they take it out on the kids instead of being present for them. So definitely he does his best and to show that, or to show everything that she needs, or he's trying to meet all her needs, like so she feels secure, loved, and that she has everything that she needs. But deeply, well, he looks like he's going through a hard time, right? Mm-hmm. And the little girl realizes that, and that's why he's her Superman.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I feel that sometimes in life we don't have answer. Because in this case, what is better, to lie or to tell the truth? We don't know. We don't have the answer. It is time to reflect, to think, and look for new ways to see this situation. But it really no answers. Mm. It's really hard.
I wonder if, like in her small way, like what we're talking as though this is a real thing, but anyway, that I think she's telling him it's okay to show some of the stuff, right? I think that's the biggest thing that I was thinking about is that I understand he's a good father, but to what cost, right? When you're not showing like how sad you are, how angry you you are, how desperate you are. Maybe not to her, right? But it's just that he has this two ways of being, and that's crazy making. And for yourself, when you have to hide who you are, and you have to have this two, and that's very typical for men, right? Like if it's a woman, maybe like that's easily shared. We talk our friends about how hard, how hard like how life is hard for us, but maybe not for men. So I was thinking about that, kind of like what is it called?
Just one comment here, and then we'll come back to you.
I was just gonna say, I think it really kind of highlighted like kids and those who love you kind of do see through it a bit, where they can tell that you're tired, they can tell that you're experiencing a lot of emotional pain, and I kind of like how she wrote it in this story kind of thing to try and communicate that, because it looked like she wasn't able to actually say it out loud, and she needed to write it and kind of communicate like it is okay to show other emotions. You don't have to be on all the time, and I can see that you're hiding these, but it's okay, and I love you, and that kind of thing. So it's just kind of a good reminder that people can see through some of that mask that you put on, especially when they really love you.
Yeah, it's pretty much. So I was going to say something pretty like similar to what you said. Sometimes we adults think that we can hide things from children. Sometimes we can think, oh, I'm fighting with my husband, with my wife, but my children do not know. We think we can hide things from them or like keep secrets from them, and the reality is that they are smart enough to see everything. They can see through walls. They can see through, like our faces, even if we're faking or trying to hide an emotion, they are able to perceive what's out there for real.
Just go to Jay and then Moise and Veronica. Yeah.
I think the video is very striking on projecting the unmasked faces of men, like showing there that he tries to hide it to his child, but I think the ad shows that it's okay for men to become vulnerable, because that's how you fail, and the perception of not showing the real you to your child, it's a bad thing, because she perceives that you're a liar. You know what I mean? It has a bad connotation. And then the projection as men tries to be like a superhero, tough, never cry, never get tired. That's a no, but we're human as well, so that's what the video is trying to say. Like, men always have that vulnerability, that it's okay to cry, it's okay to admit that we're tired, we're weak, we're lonely, we're sad. It's part of the being human, and men are not accepted to that kind of emotions.
True. The whole Moise and Anna?
And that is okay to like men when they have all this pressure to show and to talk, and I think the kids are very smart and they can understand. And it for moms as well, but maybe dads can be like more expectations, and it's good to talk with them because they feel it.
And connecting to what Tony Porter said, by the time you become a dad, you've been totally programmed to not show, right? Moise? And then we'll go to...
That does resonate with me.
You can do it. I'm here.
This is...
We're here for you.
It's... We,
But it does
absolutely.
resonate a lot with me. I'm looking at the guy. I think he's doing a great job as a dad. He's doing a great job as a dad. He's trying to be a pillar to support everything for the kids. And maybe things will get better for him. Maybe it's just a temporary, and things will go better. But the problem with pillars is maybe they're going to support it, but maybe they're going to crack. And that's the thing. We don't know which way it's going to go. Is it going to crack, or is it going to be okay down the road? That's what I see, and he needs some support. to be able to make sure that he can stay, maybe not whatever, maybe he can change a little bit, but that's what I see.
And what if he had a support group, a peer support, something like what, just the idea of what we're trying to do. Anna?
I think that one more thing that this girl is trying to tell her dad is that I love you anyways. You don't have to pretend anything. I love you the way you are. And it kind of took me to think about my father, and who is, I took it from him that no matter what, like never give up. And I thought that growing up as a girl, they expected a boy was there instead of a boy. That that should be strong. You have to be like a man, tough, and that's what I'm seeing in my dad. And a few months ago, we were in a kind of tough situation, and my father had a breakdown, went, and he came home, and my mom was still away at work, and it was just me and him. And he was all nervous and pacing back and forth, and he got a shot of vodka, and he had tears. That was the first time in my life I saw my dad crying, and I asked him, and I said, it's fine, like humans are allowed to have emotions. And he said, I'm ashamed of you seeing me crying. And I said, you know what, like, don't worry, I'm not gonna tell anyone. He didn't tell my mom about that, but like, it was helpful to him to actually share and for me to just listen, and I still love him the way I always have.
Thank you for sharing. I know, Mark, you have another thought. We're just going to see if somebody else who hasn't shared would like to share. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that we see that the things that he's really good at, where he's taking his daughter to school, he's helping with her homework, he's spending time with her, are all more the traditional women's roles. And the things that he's struggling with, finding a job, finding enough money, are traditionally men's roles. And that's what causes a lot of the problem there. He can't accept that he doesn't fit into what our society thinks he should be doing as a man. So the things he's doing really well are less valued, probably even in his own eyes.
That's a good insight, absolutely. Anyone else that hasn't shared? Yes, and then maybe after.
It's also how much this becomes a part of you. Because I was working and I had some challenges with my heart. I'm in emergency, and I'm still managing a business, still managing the organization, checking my email. And they're going to say, well, why were you checking your email at the emergency? I said, well, why did they have that there? Next thing it was taken out, but still. And my grandfather, he's like one of the strongest ones I know. He had served in the forces, he was injured, didn't come home. And my other uncle that had served with him didn't come home, he's buried over there. And I had a call from my cousin, my sister, and she told me that he'd been injured and he was in the hospital. She was with him. So, okay. So I'm in Edmonton, I'm making my way to a meeting. I said, okay, well, I'll check in Edmonton because I know he's okay. And then my aunt called and a couple others called, so he was okay. So my meeting ended. I called down and I said, well, it was Wednesday. I said, I'll be down there on Friday and I'll see if I can adjust some stuff and I'll be down there tomorrow. And she just said, try to come soon. And that's her way of telling me, like, you better be here. And so it's okay. So I adjusted myself. This is in January. And so I'm not allowed to rest of money after Christmas. Bills are coming in. And so I made arrangements to my ED. I was going to come down. Just told me, we'll do what you have to. And then tried to rent a vehicle. And there were 5 different places were sold out. I phoned one of them, and because instead of just checking the computer, I phoned one of them and asked. And I do a lot of rental, a lot of business with them. And they said, we have one coming back at 5 and we can hold it for you. So, okay, sure, thank you. So you can do, okay, so give me the rest of the stuff, figure out how to work, what am I gonna do? And then, so I lived 2 doors from my office, so went in, checked with them, so I'm gonna be heading down, I'll let you know. And packing up, and then my doorbell rang. I didn't really get visitors because I was like just at work most of the time when I was up there. And people I do know would let me know ahead of time, so when they come and stay. And it was a courier. So I signed and maybe an envelope. Some training sessions I had done before the holidays had come in my reimbursements. And so I said, okay, so I've got money to go down. Got in the vehicle. By the time I left town, wrapped up everything, left town, and got to Calgary, it was 10-ish in the evening. And we're down at Rocky View. And we had a room provided for us. So the family could go into that room and then go directly to emergency to where grandpa was, instead of going in and checking in and everything. And so I went in, and he hadn't been responsive since that morning. And so just talk to him. Yeah. So I went up. Now, when my grandmother passed away, my grandfather, myself, and my older aunt, my sister, were standing together, and we made some promises to each other. And then she passed in 2003, and me and Grandpa. And then, so I talked to him, let him know who I was, and then I told him that if he was tired and he was going to be gone, that I'd be okay. I told him the promises we made to each other, I release you from that vow, and I'll be okay, I'll manage. And he was laying there, he hadn't been responsive for over 12 hours, and then his hand started kind of moving. And so I moved my hand over, and then he held my hand. And he looked up at me, and I smiled, yes, I'm here, and talking with him. Because from my grandfather to my grandson, it's like 200 of us, it's a big family. And then his sisters, their kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, and so it's a big family. And so they were so talking with him, and then my aunt said, is he up? And my uncle said, yeah, he woke up. And so they all got up, and they were all trying to be there, then talk with him. So I let him know, I love you, and I'm just gonna move back a bit. And then so everybody was trying to get to talk to him. We updated other family. And then he rested again. And then he was brought upstairs, and again, wasn't responsive. But the levels were still strong. And then the doctors and nurses had gathered with us, with the older ones, and with the parents, with our parents, and the older ones. And they said that, his other stuff, there's been challenges in that, but I think he's just hanging on because of you guys. And you truly just put him on the machines. And so, we didn't want that, he didn't want that. So we talked with each other, and then we let the others know. So we went back in, and then his kids all shared something about, shared a good story with him, and released him. And then the nurses came back in, and they adjusted him and moved him around. And then the nieces and daughters-in-law, that level, came in and talked with him, same thing. And then we went back out again, and they checked with him, and his readings were just getting a bit more relaxed each time. And then we talked with him and let him know. And then my other brother, my other cousin that was raised with me with our grandparents said, are you going to talk? Yeah. And then so he shared. And you could just time it that as he finished talking, Grandpa just finished breathing. And just went, just surrounded by us. But he was hanging on for us. And we had to let him know we'll be okay. And we had to give him permission. And that was the second time he was in the hospital since the war. So that shows you like his drive and his going. And we just remember that was the world he grew in on. He had to be there. He had to be there for us. Even though he's tired and he's like 4 days away from being 90, he still had to be there. But we acknowledged it, we recognized it, and loved him enough to let him go.
Thank you, Adrian. Mimuna, did you want to share? Is there anybody else who had their hand up? Vic? Yeah.
I think it's the clip showed the importance of the work that we're doing. That actually this trying to fit in a box both for the men and the women is actually costly. Not only emotionally but economically as well. Late diagnosis, because we try sometimes the men, they are not trained to actually bring out what they actually feel, and if that is minor, away from the Filipino community, if it's away from the gut, you don't have to tell me or you don't have to complain. So those things, so there are lots of like late diagnosis, like they're actually diagnosed when they are in stage 4 for cancer, and those who are actually they become greatly ill. So that's one that's very costly to the society. And I think the work that we do is very important because we're trying to avoid that one. The feminization of aging. They said that there are more men dying than women, especially among the seniors now. And it's a problem not only in Canada, but as well in Southeast Asia, that there are lots of more men are dying. So these things are actually, trying to get to conform to what's in the box for both men and women is actually costly. So I think, and if we're going to do the work that we're doing here at Alberta Men's Network, I think we could give a case to government to even give us some resources.
Yeah. Thank you, Vic. Vero, you had your hand up as well. You're okay. Is there any final thoughts? I knew there would be some reactions to this video, but I felt it's really important that we allow the time to talk about this. I think my time is up. And so, because I don't want to take too much from Kiara's presentation, maybe what we can do is we can, if it's okay, should we end off with another little hopeful video on the end? And is that okay, Kiara? Just a couple minutes, then we'll go to break. And when Lemlem and I come back together to talk about the community facilitation, we're going to play some games and have some role plays. But maybe we'll have a chance a little bit to talk about Men's Action Network and the process that we're in and the work that we do. So a story of change, we're going to end off on that note because I think that's a good way to end. And my PowerPoint will be available for everyone who wants it with all the statistics and numbers and things like that as well.
With regards to going into detail, my story and difficult.
Okay. Some of you have seen this one already in our group.
Hi, my name is Rolf, and this is my story. What if it was your mother? What if it was your sister? I have been, and always will be, mama's boy. The first few years of my life, I was raised primarily by my mother. She did everything she could to provide for myself and my brother. My father brought our family to Canada for a better life. My father was a man. They call him Tony Montana or Vito Corleone. I admired his power and the respect he garnered from those around him. Being the man that he was, he would never need to hit my mother. Just the act of him raising his hands was enough to generate fear in us all. Growing up, I became a bad boy, wanting to have that power. My mother was my hero, but I wanted to be like my father. The week I got my first tattoo, I became very ill. And during that time, my mom was always by my side. She was tending to me and saw my tattoo. She was upset and began nagging me, and I raised my hands towards her. At that moment, I knew I had broken my mother's heart. I saw my father in myself and didn't want to be that man anymore. The strength of my mother was stronger than anything he had. I want to be the man that would always be there for my mother, just like she was for us. My mother was diagnosed with cancer. Even through her illness, she was the strongest out of all of us. Because she was sick, I was very sensitive. And when one day, this guy said some bad things about her, I got into a fight with him. I ended up getting in trouble with the law for it. My mother told me, "You think you're protecting me, but you're hurting yourself." I knew I'd crushed her again. I served some time, and during that time, my mom became really ill. And I was informed she was close to death. I knew she was hanging on just to see me again. When I got out, my mother was the first one to greet me at the gates. She hugged and kissed me and said, "Never again." What if it was your mother? What if it was your sister? These questions I often ask my youth when we talk about healthy relationships and violence. What if it was your mother?
Everyone in tears again. So what we see here is we see the intergenerational transmission of violence, but we also see something else. What do we see?
Redemption.
Redemption, breaking the pattern, and not only breaking the pattern for himself, but then he becomes a role model for others. And his story, instead of being something to be ashamed about, becomes a strength to share with others who are also struggling. And so I think that speaks really well, and some of our Mancey guys can let me know, it speaks quite well to our approach. Our approach is that everyone's a leader. Our approach is everyone is working to become healthier. There are no perfect people and then those who have a problem. We're all working together towards equity and sort of a kind of world that we like to see and finding our roles in that. So I'm going to end now, and I think we're going to take a quick break. And because we have Kiara here who has a wonderful presentation for us, and we don't want to miss that. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. It wasn't your typical research presentation, hopefully. As I said, I'm happy to share the full presentation with anyone who's interested. Okay, so we'll go to a break and maybe come back at 5 after 2.
Thank you.